All right, so thanks for having me, folks. This is going to be, it's typically a half-hour talk, but hopefully we get some questions during the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer anything that pops up to you. I typically go through this pretty quick. It's a lot of detail in a short amount of time, and there's a lot more to cover. So I give you some resources at the end so you can dig a bit deeper, and it looks like this is being recorded, so you can always come back, pause, rewind, but I'm always available to answer any questions, and I'd love to hear your questions. So some of the problems that I see in 2020 after being in the tech industry for 20 years and working in software, infrastructure, growing teams, running teams, scaling companies, is we always have this challenge with direction, trying to figure out where we should go, and then evaluating how we're doing. How are we progressing towards our goals? How are we improving on a regular basis? Do we need to readjust? Do we need to change our focus? And that just seems to get more and more difficult as time goes by because we have more options, we have more complexity to deal with, there's more going on all the time. And so I'm really fascinated with strategies, tools, techniques that we can use to kind of address that situation, build our confidence, build confidence in our teams, across our teams with our colleagues, and make sure that we're on the right track so we can focus on doing the work, not doubting whether the work is going to be a waste of time or that we are missing out on something. And the way I like to think about this as a model is in terms of compasses and maps. I think we have a lot of compasses when it comes to the tech industry. There's be more like Netflix, there's what Google did, there's the Spotify method, there's the 4 key metrics of Dora. All of these are sort of points in space, almost like North Stars that we can head towards. They might not necessarily be our North Stars or the best North Star for us to head towards. And we certainly don't have a clear path to get to them. And this is where maps come in. So compared to a compass, a map is really showing you your surroundings. It's showing you the difference between where you are and where you could go. It's also showing you obstacles, landmarks, milestones, things that you can leverage to make your journey easier. And that all comes from visibility and awareness. So when I talk to a lot of teams and I work with clients, we use this concept of compasses and maps to build a better picture of where we're going, how things are doing. And so we can make decisions based on data, information with a lot of confidence. The other really important aspect of compasses and maps is that they can be shared. You can pass a compass to someone and say, this is north, and they can see what you're talking about. You can also point to something on a map and someone can understand what you're talking about. And that's something I find is very rare in the tech industry, is this kind of shared understanding and this shared visibility across different groups. We often have things like meetings, we have things like documentation. And what happens with that is we can interpret those things a million different ways, right? We could take a conversation, feel like it went great, and the two different parties can separate and have a completely different understanding of what just happened. But it's really hard to misinterpret a map, if it's properly built, and we can connect it to reality in ways that allow us to bridge the gap between what we're seeing on the map and what we're seeing in the real world. All of a sudden, it can be a really valuable guide. And that's why we have things like Google Maps sending people driving into ponds, right? Because we can trust a map, or we should be able to trust a map, as long as it's relevant and recent and based on our surroundings. So these challenges that we're still dealing with in 2020, and I would argue are getting worse all the time, are major problems, not only for leadership, but for everybody in an organization, right? Whether you are in sales, whether you are in data analysis, whether you are in project management, all of this increase in complexity and friction and waste is affecting the entire organization. So it's not only relevant to people running the business, it's relevant to the individual contributor who just started last week, right? Because they have to deal with it and they're part of it, right? I mean, they're contributing to it. We're all kind of responsible, but also dealing with the fallout of all of this stuff. So value stream thinking and what I'm going to be presenting in this presentation is my strategy for dealing with that, my strategy for helping teams navigate those challenges. And I'm going to share with you some strategies and how that is going to change the DevOps landscape over the next 5 and 10 years. So why should I talk about this? Why should you care that I'm presenting the material? I've got quite a bit of experience making a lot of mistakes in this area over the course of my career. And I've learned a lot of things the hard way. But starting in IT, actually starting in the pizza business when I was a teenager, I was always obsessed with process. I was always obsessed with what does it take to go from raw materials to a finished product? And how can we kind of optimize that process? And that's what made the job fun for me. And it's made all my jobs fun since, is this lens of how can we put this together in a way that it flows, that it's fun to do, that it's interesting, and I can spend most of my time doing creative things rather than toil and repetitive, boring crap. So I brought that through all the jobs that I've done since, and starting officially with tech support. I was on the phone all the time, helping people with printer problems and Windows problems. And the first instance that I really applied this value stream thinking was looking at call volume. So we'd have calls coming into the call center, and looking at the flow of a technical issue all the way through to resolution was the first value stream that I really took seriously. And my approach was, okay, let's look at what's really going on here. Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's look at the big picture. What do we get most of our calls on? And a couple patterns showed up. It's always, how do I restore my mailbox in Microsoft Outlook? Or how do I reset my password? And so I took 80% of those requests that fit maybe 4 or 5 specific patterns and built a frequently asked questions list and published that to all of our clients. And that cut down the call volumes by 60%. So that sort of move, it helped me avoid all this stuff I didn't want to deal with, because I want to deal with interesting problems. It saved the business a ton of money, so they were super happy. The customers were happy. It was a super win. And it came from that zoom out to look at the big picture, step away, measure what's actually happening, look at my surroundings to draw a map, and with the compass of better customer outcomes in mind, I put this together, and it really didn't take a lot of effort. And I've sort of applied the same methods and the same strategies throughout my career. And I moved into build and release engineering, where there's a very clear flow from code to production, systems engineering from an empty virtual machine to a fully provisioned system. All of these flows were what I was fascinated with. And that brought me to being a CTO, where all of a sudden, you're dealing with many, many different flows, many, many different activities and responsibilities, but the same strategies applied. One of the biggest was working with our data teams in my last job. And we had a customer onboarding process that took 4 weeks. And we had 50 customers in the pipeline. So if you take that 4 weeks and you multiply it by 50, you're going to go out of business before you actually get all these customers onboarded. So by stepping away and measuring the process by which we onboarded new customers, what's involved? Let's walk it, right? Let's say step by step, what's happening through the process? How long does it take? Who's doing it? What kind of tools are involved? We were able to visualize the process, look at what was going on, and then trim it down to 4 days. So we went from 4 weeks to 4 days, almost overnight, really, by saying, okay, well, we don't need 4 different people doing these 4 different tasks. What if we had one person do all 4 sequentially? Then we wouldn't have a handoff. We wouldn't have this friction between, you tossing me work that I wasn't really prepared for or is missing some context. There's so many ways to tweak a process to improve what we're doing once we look at it and once we really measure and visualize it. And it's even easier when we can draw a map that we can share with other people because we can bring them along with us, right? It's not really valuable for us to, say this is how things must be done if people just have to trust us and go along for the ride, right? With a good compass and a good map, we can bring them along with us rather than dragging them along. And now I do consulting. So now that's what I do full time for a number of clients, from tiny startups to gigantic enterprises. And it's been fascinating. I've seen a lot of really common patterns. I've seen a lot of common challenges. And the same strategy always works. It always makes things better. And I'm going to take you through how that happens. So we're going to talk about my favorite radio station, WIIFM. What is in it for you guys? We're going to look beyond the boundaries of DevOps. I think, we have a lot of focus on DevOps right now, especially since it's become finally popular and common. It's a pretty narrow scope that we're looking at when we're considering DevOps. And a lot of people will lump a bunch of things into it and say, yeah, it's, it's sales too, and it's all this stuff. But most people don't think that way. And most people are focused on a very tiny slice of the overall value stream. And I'll explain how. We're going to get into visibility. So how visibility helps us make decisions, helps us align different perspectives, how helps us build confidence, helps us manage complexity. We're going to look at measurement and how that helps us make decisions, how it helps us kind of evaluate our progress, and really empirically settle arguments where it would have been my word versus somebody else's. Measurement can really help us kind of settle a long process of consensus building or meetings or decisions. And I find it's very powerful, especially when you combine it with visibility. Finally, we're going to talk about value and systems. And value is really, I think, something that often gets forgotten about in the technical world, certainly in the DevOps world. We hear a lot of things about automate everything. And that's terrible advice. You really should be automating what's most valuable to automate, right? And so we're going to talk about value a little bit and how value stream thinking leverages our understanding of value to constantly be prioritizing ourselves in the right direction. And the last piece directly talks about complexity, how all this fits together, how we look at all these different streams that are in our organizations, whether they're mobile app development, content creation, data pipelines. These are all streams that all connect to each other in different ways. So how does value stream thinking allow us to grapple that situation and really manage it well? So first, we're going to kick off with the idea that DevOps is too narrow a focus to really drive massive systematic improvements. So what we see with DevOps is that it only really covers a part of the value stream. And when I say value stream, I'm talking about start to finish, any major process. And start means wherever you want. Finish means wherever you want. Most commonly, it means you have raw materials, you have an idea, you have something that you want to do. And the other end being everything is totally finished and we have a customer who's happy with the outcome. But I'll get into the boundaries a little bit more. So commonly with DevOps, what happens is we focus on the CI/CD pipeline. We're looking at those boundaries between code and deploy, and we kind of ignore the things on the edges, right? Upstream from that, where we're creating tickets, and downstream where we're actually turning things on and then analyzing how well they're performing. But those are super important pieces. The value stream really starts where the process begins in the truest sense. And we can draw those goalposts however we like, but the focus is always on the biggest picture possible. The biggest picture possible that's going to deliver a positive outcome, that facilitates a really good discussion or analysis. And so we're looking from start to finish. And another way to look at that is from when something starts costing you money to when it starts making you money. Because ultimately that's what matters to the business. And that's also what matters to customers, right? They don't want to be paying you for stuff that they wouldn't pay for if you gave them the choice, right? They also don't want to pay for waiting too long to get what they want, right? So the shorter we can make that process between I'd like something and thank you very much for giving it to me, we're boosting customer value, we're boosting customer happiness, but we're also learning faster. And we're able to leverage what we learn into making things better. So DevOps is kind of a micro optimization in this sense. And you could see that if we target all of our energy in the DevOps boundaries of CI/CD or systems automation, wherever you want to draw the goalposts there, you might be automating something that has nothing to do with your real bottleneck, right? Your real bottleneck might actually be your story creation process, you know? And if you're in ops or in data or in software, you've probably got a ticket before in your life that was totally unusable. And you had to send it back and ask for more details. That could be a major bottleneck. That could be a major factor that's affecting our ability to deliver value to customers. So I think it's important to be thinking in this broad sense, at least every once in a while, so that we can have these conversations across the entire team and say, hey, you know, I keep getting tickets that I can't really resolve. I can't really do anything about because they're missing X, Y, and Z. And if we were to tackle that problem, we'd probably see a much better outcome than me going and, you know, making a best guess and trying to automate something without the right understanding of why or what it's for. But you can also focus on where the real process is breaking down, right? If it's upstream, look upstream. The boundaries of DevOps kind of give us these blinders almost, where we have to hit everything with an automation hammer, whether or not, you know, the biggest problem is automation or not, or manual tasks or not. So by looking at the full big picture from start to finish, we get this ability to enhance flow. We get this ability to learn faster because we're actually getting things to customers as quickly as possible. And we're able to have really good conversations between the tech side of the business and the business side of the business, because they both care about the same thing, right? The business cares about satisfying customers. That's the terminology they're going to use. That's the concepts they're going to use. That's the scope that they're going to think of. So talking in terms of value streams, thinking in terms of value streams allows us to have this dialogue between anyone in the organization and be on the same page, because everybody kind of understands this idea of value streaming to customers, right? Flowing value to customers, however it happens. And DevOps, you know, you can have a conversation with DevOps with who? Your CEO, maybe if you're a 12-person company. But if you're in a massive enterprise, I guarantee you they don't care about DevOps. They care about the flow of value to customers. So this new introduction into the lexicon will help us have better discussions with everybody across the business, because it's not just technical folks solving problems, it's everybody. And we all have to have the same view of what's really going on to make things better. So speaking of views, the visibility aspect that I talk about here is the idea that we can start very high level, but maybe we don't care about high level. Maybe it's not really where we play. If we're an individual contributor, maybe we only have control over a small portion of the value stream. But what we can do is start high. We could start with a vague understanding of what's going on, and we can fill in the gaps, and we can dig deeper where we see opportunities. So we might have a release process as a high level representation where, you know, we don't really know about the stuff that goes into making the story. We don't really know what goes into customer analytics, but we do know that staging deployment is a huge pain in the ass. So maybe we want to dig in there. what we can do is paint a picture that says, here's what I see. This is foggy. This stuff upstream is foggy. This stuff downstream is kind of foggy. I don't really understand it that well. What I do understand is this piece. And I think this is a major bottleneck. You can bring that to anyone in the organization and say, here's my hypothesis. If you can help me fill in the gaps here, we could find a different one. But unless you have a better idea, I'd love to dig into this and figure out what's really going on with it, what's really holding it up. So you can take that staging deploy bottleneck, jump into it, break it apart into its own segment of the value stream and say, okay, by looking at this segment of the value stream, I can see that the production sync, where we pull data from production in order to remix it or obfuscate it so that we can use it for staging, that takes forever, or there's something broken with it and it never works, or it takes way too long. That gives us this ability to then zoom back up and say, hey, you know, I tackled that production sync issue. Here's how it affects the big picture. And that's a win that anyone in the organization can understand, right? They might not care about the production sync problem, but when you show it to them in the context of the release process, all of a sudden, oh, you made the release better. So it can give us this ability to kind of refocus and have conversations at different levels. And we don't always have to be thinking big picture or down in the weeds. We can zoom out and zoom in. But the really valuable thing about this is that we can share the same understanding. So even a rough diagram like this, you could sketch this on the back of a napkin and have a conversation with someone, or on an interactive whiteboard for 2020. We can share the same view. We can have conversations where I can point to something, you can see it, and we can both be on the same page. And what happens when we do this is that by taking a step back and actually measuring what's going on, and I'll get into measurement immediately after this, we're able to find these low-hanging fruit opportunities that drive massive improvements. So often what happens with a team when I draw out a current state value stream map with them is that they have 20% of the time just immediately returned. Like we just get rid of something that didn't make any sense to do in the first place, or maybe we get rid of one handoff that takes a couple days because it's via email. All of a sudden, we're saving 20% of a value stream, and that's realized and recognized repeatedly. So if we save 1 day a week on a weekly process, that's 52 days a year, right? If our sprints are 2 weeks and we save 2 days out of every sprint, that's 26 times that benefit gets realized. So this can be a really big deal. And that's only in the first year. Most times we're not changing things for 3 years, 2 years. So the impacts of our improvements can have a major effect. So what do we mean by measurement, and how does all this kind of pop out to us? How does this all come together? When I talk about a value stream and I talk about a value stream map, the core components are the steps involved in the process. So we literally lay out step by step from the start to the finish. What are the individual activities that we're performing? And we can define those by when do we hand something from one person to another person? Or it can be I'm doing something specific, like I'm coding, but then I start a build, right? Or I check it in and a build starts. Those are two separate activities, but you can draw the boundaries wherever you feel comfortable. You don't want 2,000 steps in the process. Probably 15, 20 is a good way to draw the boundaries. But layered on top of those steps, we have timing, and the timing really helps us make the decisions. Without timing, you just have a process map, and it doesn't really reflect reality at all because it's just an arbitrary sequence of events. Once we add the timing, we start to see the connection to reality, what's actually happening, and how long does it take, and how long is the delay between one activity and the next. So the time above is the time that's spent performing the activity, and the wait time below is the time that we're waiting from one activity to the next. Sometimes there's no wait, right, if it's automated, but oftentimes that wait can be significant if it's passed between two different people and it goes by email or a ticket. There can be a huge delay there. So coming back to this idea, if we're looking at CI/CD pipeline, we're missing all these measurements that kind of live at the edges. And we could say that all of these DORA metrics, the 4 key metrics of DevOps, the really famous measurements that we're using all over the industry right now, which I actually love, can layer on top of this in a way that you can't measure inside of a CI/CD pipeline, right? You're not able to measure really anything beyond deployment frequency in a CI/CD pipeline. So by looking in terms of the value stream and measuring at a value stream level, we're able to capture all these 4 key metrics, the ones that the business cares about, the ones that really make teams steadily improve. And I think that's really powerful. The more we narrow our lens to CI/CD pipelines or data pipelines, the more we're missing this opportunity at the edges. So what does this look like in real life? This is a real life value stream from a client of mine. What they did was they came to me, they said, we have a ton of money to put towards deployment automation. We want to do deployment automation. We read about it in the Phoenix project. It sounds amazing. It's exactly what we need. But what we need is to get money from the board. We need approval to get these funds, to get the budget to do this work. And they wanted $20 million to do deployment automation. Would have taken them maybe 12 months, 18 months to roll this out. But we looked at the value stream because we wanted data that they could bring and make the argument for the budget. And what happened was we had 2 candidates pop up that were not deployment automation. You'll see artifact deploy step 3 doesn't really show up on the radar. What does show up on the radar is this environment creation. So refreshing and creating staging and development environments, and then acceptance testing on the other end. And the acceptance testing is a massive chunk of the value stream here. You've got a huge delay in this process. So what we're looking at with environment creation and acceptance testing, if we look at acceptance testing, for instance, this is a good one because it's much larger. If it only took 30 minutes, which means it's just a product owner basically looking at it and saying, okay, that looks fine. Super low value activity, right? Might be able to even automate it, but who knows? Maybe it's something that we can just get whoever's doing some other step to do in parallel, right? But the handoff between performance testing and acceptance testing is 12 hours because we finished performance testing. It probably sits in a Jira ticket or an email. And then whoever's going to do the acceptance testing says, oh, there's acceptance testing to do. And then they do it for half an hour and then they hand it off again. And it goes 8 hours. It probably goes overnight again to maybe a product owner, maybe somebody else, maybe a customer to do validation. And all that time is just for a simple check. So these are the sort of things that can pop out at us where if we were spending all of our time and energy on artifact deployments, we wouldn't be moving the needle at all. Nobody would even notice that we did anything in terms of lead time because we've got 11 hours, 20 hours, and 12 minutes. So if we were to improve deployment automation somehow, maybe we get it down to 10 seconds. Who cares, right? Saving 12 minutes, even if it went down to 0, it's nothing compared to the big picture. So this is the sort of power that we see once we start measuring, once we look at the big picture. So there's another piece of this that's coming out soon. It's slowly developing, I would say, with the idea of value stream management. What I was showing you before, this is value stream mapping. It's this process of visualizing value stream. But the management aspect is really where we get to continuous measurement. So once you've mapped a value stream, we can go a little bit further and add integrations. We can plug Jira, we can plug GitHub, all kinds of things into a value stream management system to measure not just once or every once in a while, but we can be measuring this performance continually. And it's not necessarily going to drive insights the same way that mapping does, but it's going to tell us when things sort of start to slide, and that can be really valuable as well. So keep your eye open for that. You might be already hearing about it, but it is the next big thing. Which brings me to value. I can't ignore value. I can't escape it. I spent a lot of time in my career doing things that were questionably valuable because I was working in a silo, in a DevOps silo. I was working in a technical context with very little awareness of the business, things that are happening upstream, things that are happening downstream. And it wasn't until I really built this awareness and understanding of value where things really started to make a huge difference. And value is the thing that the business understands, the CEO understands, the salespeople understand, customer success understands. We all sort of understand it differently. And I think we have a long way to go before we all really understand it very well. But what I would say to you is try to build an understanding of value and a common understanding of value in your organization, because it's going to be the difference between automating something or spending all your time building something that doesn't actually matter and doing something that really makes a difference. And I've made the mistakes in the past where thinking that if I spent a lot of time on something, it was valuable. Or if I put a lot of effort into it, it was valuable. Or if it costs a lot, then it must be valuable. Or if it was extremely high quality, surely somebody would find it valuable. But you could make a perfect, absolutely flawless brick of lead that nobody wants to buy, that nobody cares about at all. And I think that happens a lot in the tech industry. And in a lot of teams, we're building things in isolation without this concept of customers and value. And we build things that ultimately nobody cares about in the end. And I've been through multiple efforts in the past where you get 3 weeks into something, you built it, it's working perfectly, and then you show it off and someone says, oh yeah, we're just going to do this other thing. Or, that's great, but we found the solution, we're just going to buy it. And that's a terrible feeling, right? So understanding why you're doing what you're doing, why you make the choices to invest in a specific area, build a specific thing, automate something, it's super important, and it'll save time, money, effort, cost, quality. It saves all of these things. So what does that mean in a little bit more detail? And I think people can sort of narrow this definition a little bit too much, where they just think about customer value. But we have to also consider business value. Sometimes we're looking way ahead of a customer. Sometimes we're looking at what's valuable to the business. Maybe we're trying to build new capabilities or experiment in new areas, and customers don't care yet. So we can't always be thinking about customers. We have internal customers and external customers, but business value is a little bit different. And I think we also can ignore employee value, right? Things like training or support, things that make our lives easier, things that eliminate toil. The more we can sort of look at our efforts and our plans and our strategies in these 3 different lenses and say, yeah, ultimately, this isn't super valuable to customers immediately, but by being valuable to employees, it means we're able to retain talent, maybe grow the team with higher capabilities, and that's going to lead to better business and customer outcomes. So this is another kind of framework that I would love to leave everybody with to help you have better discussions and make better decisions, and have that thing that we can discuss where we can each point to something and say, yeah, this is what, when I'm talking in terms of customers, here's what I mean. Or, I think this is really valuable in the business context, but not really in the customer context. And we really have to focus there right now. So that can save us a ton of time and effort and pain, frankly. So I also think that it's really important for us to think of where and what is the value of each activity that we're performing, especially in the context of a value stream. So the way that we would do this is look at, from the start all the way to delivery, what is the value that we're adding by doing this? And what value are we getting out of it? So we look at a retrospective, for instance. We do a retrospective every week. How valuable is it? Do we really feel like we're getting a lot of value from it? And that could mean either we stop doing it, which I wouldn't advise, but it's an option. But it can mean how can we enhance the value of this? How can we make this more valuable to the team? Why are we not getting a lot of value out of it? And that will lead to better outcomes, right? Our ability to think of things in terms of value means that we're able to improve outcomes by focusing on what really matters, what's actually driving specific effects. The last piece here, and I'm almost out of the presentation for you. I'd love to hear your questions, so feel free to ping me after, and we can get to anything that has kind of interested you or made you think or made you wonder about something. This idea of complexity, where we need better ways of kind of zooming out and zooming in and focusing in different areas, but understanding that all these things are sort of connected. In some cases, they're connected too much. We can have really hard dependencies that we have to deal with. We can have situations where we can't move fast because we have a requirement to abide by a specific SLA that's imposed by another department, and they take as long as the SLA will allow, right? I've dealt with lots of teams where, yeah, they have to send in a ticket to another team who has a 10-day SLA, and every single time it comes in at 9.5 days, they figure it out. And so by looking at the big picture and saying, okay, well, we could really kill ourselves to improve our piece of the pie here. We could really improve our section of the value stream. But if we ignore that 10-day SLA, and if we ignore that dependency, then we're really wasting a lot of time and effort on something that's not really going to make a difference. If we could save 1 day a week, and meanwhile this other department is costing us 9.5 days, why would we do that, right? Like the company's money is better spent, everyone's time is better spent looking at that, trying to figure that out. And so our ability to look at all these different streams and how they connect, and how the web app stream depends on the platform stream, and the mobile app stream depends on both of them, all of a sudden, a bottleneck in the platform team is affecting way more than just the platform team, right? It's everyone who depends on the platform. Likewise, the same with libraries, with shared code, with design resources, with customer support or customer success, documentation, all of these things. I talk to so many marketing departments who get thrown work, or it just shows up in production and they never knew it was coming. So all of a sudden they have to scramble to build some documentation or a webinar to tell customers that this thing is, not only is it coming, but it's already here. And so when you log into the app, it's going to be totally different. But if we thought in terms of the value stream more often, we would see, okay, well, downstream marketing is going to have to do this. So upstream, we better give them some notice. We better bring them in early enough that they can be ready for this. And that's what I mean when I think of focusing on digging into specific parts of the value stream, but zooming out and looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, how they all relate, how all of this is connected, and how we need to go from silos to systems. So that brings me to a recap. Really what I'm talking about when I talk about value stream thinking is thinking beyond the boundaries of what we would commonly consider DevOps. And I would also argue, piling everything into the term of DevOps is not going to help us. It was never meant to cover the entire spectrum of strategy, ideas, and customer analysis and feedback. It really was not. Neither was Agile. They're built to solve very specific problems. A value stream, however, was built to solve that entire end-to-end picture. It started in car manufacturing as a way of looking at raw materials to driving a car off the lot and giving it to a customer. And that works well in software. It's not a perfect analogy, but it really serves us if we're trying to find the biggest bottleneck and tackle our biggest opportunity. So we do that by tools to give us better visibility, to share understanding, We do that by adding measurement to make it real, to make it quantifiable, to measure our progress, to make decisions on what would actually have the most impact. We do it by considering value, right? Until we're having regular conversations that include value, we really don't know what we're doing, right? I mean, we're making assumptions about what's actually going to matter. So the more value becomes part of the lexicon that we're using on a regular basis, the more it's more likely to be forgotten. And we do things in silos and we build things that don't matter. 50% of features don't get used, right? So we could either build more valuable work or work twice as fast, or twice as hard. And finally, we constantly have this increasing and explosive complexity, right? Nobody could have imagined managing something like Kubernetes or super complex data pipelines 5 years ago. And now we all have to do it on a regular basis, right? And we're just going to go on from there, right? We're building platforms and frameworks on top of platforms and frameworks, and that abstraction is not really making anything easier. We just have better ways of dealing with it, and we're adapting and we're learning. And one of the things that I've learned, I would say the most important thing that I've learned, is this concept of value streams. So if you're interested in more about this, if you've got more questions, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to help you work out some of the challenges that you've got. And I've got an open calendar at meet.visible.is. Go check it out, book anything with me, zero cost, zero obligation. I just love to hear different stories and see where I can help with easy things, because usually there's a lot that you can do very quickly to make progress with this stuff. And I'll leave you with a final resource, which is thinking.visible.is. That is a collection of a bunch of different articles, videos, tutorials about value streams and value stream activities like mapping, how value streams compare to things like a CI/CD pipeline or a Wardley map or anything else that you might have heard of. And hopefully that answers a lot of questions. Hopefully that gives you a lot of value. And thank you very much for attending the session. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Steve. We do have one question, if you're able to answer it before you head out.
Sure.
This comes from Alex, and they ask, with your value triangle, should employee, customer, and business value all have equal weight? If so, how do we get there if we're too far on one side?
That's a fantastic question. And let me just jump back for anyone who's wondering what we're talking about here. So I think they do have to be weighed equally. And the way that I think about this is just through some simple thought experiments, right? If we focus entirely on customers, what happens? We cut our prices to zero because our customers want everything for free. Then the business goes out of business and all the employees get fired. Or if we focus entirely on employee value, everyone just plays ping pong all day. And if we focus entirely on business value, then all of a sudden, all we're doing is trying to maximize profits, which means we're squeezing our employees, we're demanding too much of them, and we're probably charging our customers too much. So I think sustainability and really the responsible way of approaching this triangle is to try and balance it as much as we can. And we can make short-term sacrifices in specific ways on purpose with an eye to, a sustainable balance over the long term. Because sometimes we have to make those choices, right? Sometimes we have to, work under a crunch to deliver something to customers, but we should balance that by saying, okay, we shipped it, they're happy. Let's, all work on some special projects or something fun for a couple of days while we recharge. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, I am not seeing any other additional questions, it looks like. So yeah, as a reminder, you can always connect with Steve and anyone else in chat windows. So we've got about, I think, 15 minutes left or so of this session. So Steve, if you just want to hang out in the Slack room until then, feel free to go ahead and type questions in there as well.
Sure, I'll jump into Slack.
Awesome, sounds good. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.